let's go ahead and get started then. If you're stuck on one of those quiz questions, we can always talk about it. That's perfectly fine, but otherwise we should get going and continuing on. You may notice there's some sort of pattern to those quiz codes. If you're able to figure it out through legitimate means, then you're good to go. You don't have to come to class on Thursdays, but it wasn't meant to be something that you could easily figure out. But if you do, that's great too. Where we left off on Tuesday is we were talking about the various open source intelligence tools, things we can find via the sort of passive reconnaissance steps. What is basically already available to us, either via internet sources or other publicly available sources that we can use to learn more about our target organization, our target network. We were previously talking about things like analyzing DNS websites as well as the individual website itself and what information just may be on a publicly available website for an organization. And that's sort of looking at just today's website. What does the website look like today? What information is available on that site today? We also have the capability within some limitations of going back. There could have been very relevant information that would have been on a previous version of that website but had since been removed, either just to updates to the website or due to that organization recognizing we have this information on our website, we probably shouldn't have had this information on our website. So your resource, and still the primary resource for looking at older versions of a website, is the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. Has anyone used archive.org before in this or other context? A few of you. It's always worth looking at, even if not necessarily in this context, just to kind of take a trip down memory lane to look at prior versions of a website and figuring out, what did the website look like back then. So the link is archive.org or web.archive.org, and you can go in and you can look at older versions of basically any publicly accessible website, like our department's own website. It's currently ece.iastate.edu. If we want to go further back, we have to kind of look at ee.iastate.edu, and it gives you this snapshot of this historical view of what that website as captured looked like at various points in time. Now, you can think of Google search as already kind of indexing the world's publicly available websites. The Wayback Machine, archive.org, at least this functionality of archive.org, is basically also doing the same thing. The main difference is as it's doing that web indexing, it's also taking a local snapshot of that site as well. We can go pretty far back if we want to look at, we can look at basically, this isn't necessarily the first version of our department's website, but this would be, I guess, the first captured or first indexed view of this website. This is back 1997. I'm guessing most of you weren't alive in 1997. And this is what our department's website looked like in 1997. I actually had a screenshot of it on the site. And my take on that website, I actually think it looks okay. For what a departmental website needs to be in 1997, I think it gets the job done. And the only other thing I did is kind of strolling down memory lane is I was certainly not here in 1997, but you can relatively slowly look at departmental information, look for faculty and staff, and see if your favorite or least favorite or just professor were they here in the department or not back in 1997. And yes, even Doug Jacobson had a website back then. Doug Jacobson's website goes back as old as the internet itself, and his office still looks pretty much the same this many years later. Now, this is a pretty great resource for looking at older versions of websites. There are some limitations. Just like any search engine is supposed to respect certain requests by a web administrator to say, hey, please index this, this, and this, but not this, that, and the other, archive.org will also adhere to those requests. And if perchance a company were to actually push something relatively sensitive on their website and they would want to then remove what is available on that website, at least as an organization trying to stay kind of one step ahead of all legal obligations, the Internet Archive will generally will honor removal requests. So if a company wants to get rid of something on the archive, they'll generally adhere to that and remove what's on the website. But going back, looking at what a website used to look like, what information they used to provide, is potentially as valuable as looking at what the website looks like today. Just another tool in your tool bag for gaining open source intelligence on an organization. There's other things we can do to discover organizational information. Lots of organizations still actually have publicly searchable directories. And even without it, even if there wasn't a publicly searchable directory, social media itself can provide a lot of employee detail. So there's tools that are really attempting to just be a scraper for LinkedIn and other social media sites that allow you sort of mass export relevant profiles. A couple examples I have here, LinkedIn and InSpy. They're really just web scrapers. So there's an API for LinkedIn, and if the API isn't sufficient, you can just do a manual kind of web scraping of any website. So in that sense, those tools kind of get dated quickly because a company like LinkedIn doesn't want people, without paying for that access, to have kind of algorithmic access to their content. But it's also hard to prevent in the general sense of, if you allow users to access a site, you're allowing them to kind of archive or scrape or download content off that site. But the idea behind those tools would be, if I'm really interested in a particular organization, I can do a particular search query and get kind of a custom report back of, at least based what's on this particular social media site, here are all the employees and all the contact information for the employees or people who are associated with that particular organization. But in other times, we don't really need to do that scraping. And some organizations, and I'll pick on University of Iowa again, have just an employee website or employee directly that you can directly search. I think that's mostly an artifact of universities in an era of like openness in universities. I think there's very few organizations outside of universities, nonprofits, things of that nature, that you can go in and actually search and get a listing for every single employee of that organization. Based on what we were playing around with Tuesday, are there any employees that come to mind that we should look up at the University of Iowa? We can look up Kirk Ferentz. We can look up his salary information and things like that. Based on what we did on Tuesday, though, that's fine. Recently unsuspended coach Kirk Ferentz. Who did we look up on Tuesday when we were looking at the University of Iowa? The name doesn't matter, but who was it? And where did we find their name? Yeah, it was their web administrator, right? It was in the Who Is data. It was a little surprising to see that just it's a name. It's not just sort of a general site contact or technical contact. It is an actual person, and I think we have to be a little careful how far we go with this because I don't know this person, and they did not volunteer to be looked up in class. But this is open source intelligence, right? This is passive reconnaissance. This is information the University of Iowa is providing to us. We're not hacking into their website. Select all squares with bicycles. Well, I don't know, right? So, okay, you got to give it a try. I think it's actually more checking your clicking pattern versus actually if you get it correctly or not. Like what order and how fast you're able to detect that. I don't know, is that a motorcycle? It did work. Okay, there we go. So I'm not a robot, at least as of now. And so we could use all sorts of LinkedIn and related tools to find more information about people. But we can just directly look up their directory as well. Title, network architect, office phone, their campus mail address. We have a pretty good lead on this person if this is someone we really need to learn more about to pursue potentially nefarious means, or just to discover weaknesses in their organization. You can also learn things through job postings as well. This is something that most organizations would provide publicly accessible job postings because they want to be able to get applicants. But if you were to look for job searches, and here I got University of Iowa again, you have to be a little careful what you'd be searching for this search to make sense. But if you're looking for, do I want to learn more about technical architecture underlying some of their operations, you could probably just search for IT related things. If I'm curious about what kind of Linux infrastructure they're running, we can click on systems analyst. I have not clicked on these. We can apply for the job, but I don't know if I'm qualified. So far, Linux, Mac, Windows workstation, that is a little bit more generic. What other jobs do we have here? Application developer, on-site support, senior application developer. And as you peruse these listings, sometimes you have to go a little bit further down to see what sort of technical experience they're looking for. So here they're looking for Epic experience. This is something to do with their healthcare systems and working with electronic medical records. But previous Unix, Linux, shell scripting, bash, and pretty soon you'll be qualified to apply for this job if you are not already. Connexall alert management system. I'm not looking for something really specific right now, so I don't know if I've found a match or not with this particular search, but looking at job listings can also tell you something about the organization and their underlying technical infrastructure. Going back to kind of using our skills to cyberstalk people, there's also username search tools, right? So given a username, which if we have an email address, we oftentimes have a username. Not all systems map usernames to email addresses, but a lot of systems do. There's username search tools that will tell you, given a username, and if it's not something common like, Steve Smith or something like that, where else was that username in use? They may not all be exact matches, but it's a starting point. If we want to discover a person's password, can we go from a username, which we have the email address here, but then there's an email, in fact, a net ID or Hawk ID. So we probably have this person's username. Why they're providing that on their directory listing, I don't know, but there it is. Given a person's username, you should be able to go from a username to a username search engine. Seems like a pretty common last name, but I don't know, or a common username if that happens to be someone's last name. But we can search for it. Let's make sure nothing inappropriate comes up. I think we're okay for what's my name. Okay. Today we convinced the world we are not robots. And that is a Google search. Okay, but now here it's starting to come up as it's looking through various databases of usernames, and, and you may have a starting point, right? Now, we can't say for certain how many of these are actually this particular user. If it's a more unique username, I think there's a higher likelihood. If it was Milson14783 or something, you probably have a higher likelihood that it's actually correlated to the same user. We have all these different services. And it is possible that the University of Iowa has a pretty good security policy. I certainly hope they do. And it's not going to be very straightforward to kind of do authentication workarounds and to figure out someone's password from their own internal systems. But at least for this particular user, and this is only page one of the results, that username shows up in leaks of usernames that have occurred on a lot of different services, some of which probably have pretty robust security, but I guess the median one probably doesn't, right? And so it is very likely. I don't want to take that next step, but it's very likely that passwords for this username are available in various data breaches. And it is also somewhat likely that if it is a correlated user, the password in those data breaches will be very close, if not exactly the same as the password used in their internal organizational credentials. So you can learn a lot about just a DNS entry to a user, to a username. You can then do people search if you want to. What was the name again? Andy Milson. Oh, I bet he's an Andrew. Iowa City. Now we have potential Facebook, LinkedIn, and if we want to figure out primary phone number, various email addresses used over time, possible associations, and this is what sort of the free account, possible home addresses as well. So this is one poor IT administrator at the University of Iowa for your target organization. You're going to be able to follow that kind of approach, even if they don't really believe they're leaking that kind of information. University of Iowa, through that employee directory, is leaking some interesting information with actual user IDs, equivalent to our net IDs here. And from there, you can start to have a lot of fun because people are fallible. We reuse that information. We reuse usernames, we reuse net IDs, we reuse passwords, and you're actually leaking, while it doesn't seem like a lot by just having a DNS entry with someone's name associated with it, you may be leaking a starting point for taking over their website or just penetrating their system more generally. You can also use search engines more generally. This is kind of a good life hack beyond just being useful for open source intelligence. The term is called Google hacking, otherwise known as Google dorking. I don't really like either of those terms because hacking kind of implies, that there's some more in-depth technical skill associated with it, and I just don't like the term dorking. Advanced Google search knowledge is what you could also refer to this particular set of tools. Just a technique that allows you to customize search parameters to find what would otherwise be potentially hidden or sensitive information. It's not really specific to Google. Google is really the first well-known search engine provider that also provide a little bit more than just a keyword search, that provides you this ability to do a slightly more customized type of search that would give you a little bit more power in your search than just looking for particular keywords. The trend is actually going in the opposite direction right now. In terms of the functionality of Google Advanced Search was actually a little bit better 3 years ago than it is today. And I just try to hypothesize why that's the case, why they're sort of removing functionality over time. And I don't know, but it's certainly possible that Google as a company, their search technology is sometimes at odds with their advertising technology, right? If their search is too good, you find exactly what you want right away, and you may or may not be spending more time viewing ads and spending less time on the site as a whole. Um, so you can click directly and do Google Advanced Search, and there's an interface for it. There's also in ExploitDB a database of Google Advanced Searches, but you really don't need to go to the Google Advanced Search site. You can do it directly in your Google search strings themselves. There's a lot of different things, and there's a listing of the functionality that is available beyond just keyword search. So one pretty good starting point is if I want to search a particular site or domain, I search whatever keywords I am interested in, and then append to the search at any point in the search, site colon, and then the site or domain I'm interested in. I actually use that all the time. So I was thinking of an experiment that would show why this is oftentimes better than just trying to navigate a site itself. Let's leave poor Mr. Milson alone. Let's say I'm a student in cybersecurity engineering, which some of you are, and I wanted to know what technical electives I'm able to take. Someone look at their watch and start a timer now. It doesn't have to be that official, just roughly. I'm a cybersecurity student. I want to figure out what technical electives I can take. Well, I can email my advisor, but that's going to take some time. I go to our website. It's a nice website. I kind of prefer the 1995 version, but it's a nice website as well. Where do I go? Okay, I'm a current student. Well, okay, there's Professor Shannon. Cybersecurity, bachelor's degree requirements, technical elective requirements, flowcharts, and technical electives list. Found it. Time, rough. Not too bad, but I actually probably knew what I was doing already. It might take you a little bit longer than that. Instead, I'm a Sci-B. Just search for it. There it is. So oftentimes navigating the site is easier by searching for things on the site versus actually trying to navigate the site. So beyond its value in doing this kind of Google hacking, it's just a valuable way to kind of navigate around the web and get to what you need to get to exclude sites or include only particular sites. Sites try to provide their own built-in search, oftentimes powered by Google. Google seems to do a better job indexing than the site's own indexing operations sometimes. It also supports something of a more advanced kind of logical and wildcard type of matches. Doesn't do like regular expressions, but oftentimes you can get pretty far with some really interesting tailored matches. There are some interesting techniques that we can combine. This is just an example here that if I'm looking for in text, so in the text of the document that's indexed, AWS access key ID or secret access key in a file of type JSON or a file of type YAML, that is a Google search that will look for those particular types of files and those particular strings found in those particular type of files. Now, I had mentioned that these searches aren't quite as powerful as they used to be. And again, I was trying to think of a couple different reasons why that would be necessarily the case. Well, we got one example. So you can still find it if you want to look for AWS keys for a user. I think it's very likely that as Google is indexing the web, they're very aware, cognizant of these kind of searches. And if they're discovering that these kind of searches are available and this kind of information is available, there's sort of a parallel effort to kind of delist those particular entries. They're not beholden to just list everything they possibly find. Excuse me. If they are finding particular secrets being put on the web, they're very likely to try to remove them. I think if I were to navigate through these sites, yeah, eventually it's going to say it didn't find anything. Actually, in fact, what it says, we have omitted some entries very similar, and so eventually it'll say, we've removed some things that shouldn't have been in this search. That's just one example. Another example is all in URL. So in the actual URL itself, I'm looking for URLs that are tsweb/default.htm. TSWeb, TS stands for Terminal Services, kind of a old Windows name for what's now remote desktop connection. So this is a search for websites that have a web interface to remote desktop, essentially. And if we were to check that one, and in default, that HTML also potentially implies that it's a default configuration of that as well. You can change certain things about the configuration and not others, but now we have access to an Oklahoma University remote desktop web connection with a username and password, but potentially some sort of default username or password, or something that we can access via some other acquired credentials along the way. But again, that's also something that's likely to be delisted over time. That's a dangerous thing to have in a Google search result. It's something that Google doesn't necessarily want to prioritize in their Google search results. So I mentioned the Google hacking database. This is in exploitdb.com if you can't read that URL / Google hacking database, or we can actually click the link in the slide itself. And this it's an unfortunate kind of unfiltered or unmoderated list of user-submitted Google dorks or Google hack, just the various queries that may or may not do something interesting in Google search results. Um, it's unmoderated. There's no voting. It's really just sorted by the date in which somebody provided a submission to it. So there's no quality filter here either. And there's a lot of them. So one thing I thought we can do is you can navigate to that through the slides if you need to go to Canvas, or it's exploitdb.com and you will find the site there. I wanted us to just take a few minutes and partner up. And if there's three of you, just the three of you pair up together, and let's take a few minutes. And I wouldn't start at the beginning, but kind of click randomly in the list. And there's a lot of them. That's 100 per page, so 8,000 different entries. Click randomly through the list. Click on a few different ones. Try to understand what they're doing, and then I'll kind of ask. And if we come up with 1 to 2 to 3 as a class, interesting ones, we'll bring them up and see what they actually do here today. So take a few minutes. Exploit-db.com. Give it a go. Chat with the person next to you. Scooch over if you have to, and let's see what we find. Let's see what we can come up with. Okay. And I guess I should have mentioned that when I was discussing looking for potentially interesting Google hacks through this database, it's very unlikely you'll be able to find break into system Google search string that provides the entire backdoor to a particular system. If such a string was possible, and if it did exist at one point in time, it probably wouldn't have been publicly posted here. It'd be a little bit too valuable to keep. And by the time it would be posted here, it probably wouldn't be relevant anymore. So we're still sort of in the reconnaissance phase. I just want to remember that when you're looking for these kind of things, what can we learn about particular systems and people through what is intentionally, or in this case, I think oftentimes unintentionally publicly accessible information. We're staying fully on this side of legality and trying very hard not to cross over, because we're not doing this in our lab kind of ethical hacking context here. I said we were just sort of randomly reviewing and seeing what became interesting to us. I found one that we don't, again, have to kind of own the entire world with a Google search string. This one I thought was kind of interesting because it's simple and straightforward. Index, or in title, index of, and then also in the result /students. This to me implies we're looking for a publicly accessible directory of students. That's how I would look at kind of like a directory site listing here. And clicked on the second one here, and to me, that's sufficiently juicy. I don't know what rabbit.engineering.miami.edu is, but I have a hunch, right, that this is some directory listing of all of the College of Engineering's University of Miami's students. You could do a lot with that. I haven't looked at other ones here. Future students. Poor St. Thomas High School. Seems okay. That may have been removed. But that was just the first one that popped up. And like I said, there's no real moderation of this list. We can't necessarily look at most recent or oldest and know that these are good, bad, or indifferent. Looking for volunteers, as you discussed amongst 2 or 3 of you, did you come up with anything, or find something that was kind of interesting? Sure. UAT dot? Oh, UAT dot star, okay. Do I need the quotes? I don't recall, but we'll put the quotes there anyway. So UAT dot star star. I'm just trying to think what that would correspond to. UAT. That's pretty cool. Now, just because there's a server doesn't mean that, it's kind of good starting point. Thank you. Other ones? Found any passwords, anything other? Sure. I feel like that was, of course, the actual exploit DB site comes up first, and I did not ask for Gemini AI to provide me help with that. Let's click omitted results included, but we want the very similar looking omitted results. You gotta be a little careful with clicking on random links in a class that you're posting on the internet. Okay, your global studies. Oh, who cares? Proceed. And that seems like bad news for that to be. How did that happen? What web service or site is providing just a direct directory listing of your SSH key information here? Okay, so it's not all indexed at least. It probably was at some point. Yeah, that's bad news for them. They really shouldn't be providing that, and some of those are not actually available on that random one we clicked. Any others that we found that we thought were kind of interesting? Sure. Oh wait, you're too fast for me. Okay. In text : All right. Say it again. I'm sorry. All one word. Oh, okay. .com.star. So not so sort of what would be .com.star? So .com. So that one is it user? I said use file. User files is what you said. Okay. I don't want to click those, but certainly some. If I cared about, Hongda Industrial in Hong Kong, that'd be very interesting, right? In terms of what information they're putting on the internet. When we're kind of crossing language boundaries as well, this could be really critical things, or who knows what it is actually until you kind of click around. Probably, so this is demonstrating, the Google search power, right? If we're looking at a particular organization, we would probably restrict our site to that organization's broader web infrastructure, not just trawling the internet as a whole. We have a little bit of time. And any others? Sure. Oops, site github.com. In title. So more secrets kind of pushed into a GitHub repository. And I'm enough of these searches gets Google a little concerned if you're doing enough custom searches. So they're worried about my robot. So we would not be looking at errors that sample, convert. Let's see. Those are all. That one looks promising. Yep. So there you go. That could still be an example. You got to be a little careful with some of these are like example keys and things like that. I know GitHub as an organization and related GitHub hosting sites are working very hard to make it difficult for people to push secrets to their repositories. It's such a well-known sort of common issue across GitHub postings that if you try to push a .env file or some other configs, you have to override many different settings to even have that happen because there is that kind of broader concern of secrets being leaked across GitHub. So great. So these are all just kind of starting points for what can we learn in this case via what's already publicly being indexed. You can think of if you think of Google as indexing port 80 and 443 across the web, you can then think of Shodan as kind of indexing everything else. So if people used Shodan before, familiar with it? Something new. This is excellent. So Google is meant for indexing websites. Shodan indexes basically everything else that's connected to the internet via periodic scans of commonly used ports. We will eventually learn specifically about Internet of Things security and why that's a special, separate, relevant topic. But the long and short for our purposes now is that there's a lot more things connected to the internet than one might expect at first glance. But on the flip side, while maybe 20 years ago, the scope of all the potential things connected to the internet was beyond our ability to even consider indexing, it's really not the case anymore, right? Think about our, or at least our IPv4 IP address space. It's not quite, let's say 4 billion addresses just for sake of argument. 4 billion addresses. Think of the commonly used ports that would be potential interest. Maybe there's at most 100 of them that are used by well-known services and devices. So 400 billion ports is what they're effectively periodically scanning. One computer couldn't do that. You partition that workload, you split it up probably geographically as well. You can essentially, in this day and age, essentially index the entire internet, not just Google, which is indexing the entire World Wide Web, right? Those are two different things. Google's indexing HTTP, Shodan's trying to index basically everything else. And you can create an account with your academic email and get essentially sort of a pro Shodan account to really kind of play around with it. Google can reveal potentially sensitive information. Shodan can reveal all sorts of other things, physical things that are then also connected to the internet. We have to be a little careful with this. I think I'm going to try to be all careful all semester with this kind of thing when we're doing things sort of live. There are all sorts of fun search terms, and I got to be a little careful here. I have a few. So this search is for a particular type of web camera that has public port facing the internet. And you have to be careful because people have web cameras connected for all sorts of different reasons. This one looks perfectly fine. Someone's backyard web camera. It looks lovely. Just the one source. You can kind of even pan it around and zoom it around and just look at this person's backyard, and they have a nice bird feeder there. And so the question maybe then, what was the intention for that to be publicly accessible or not? So people may intentionally say, I want a publicly accessible web camera. Iowa State has several, right, with various views of campus. Whether intended or not, it's basically there. There's all sorts of kind of fun resources of people basically attempting, like with the Google hacks, coming up with databases of fun Shodan search strings. The possibilities are quite a bit more here, because again, with Google, it's kind of text lookup for particular strings in a URL, in a title, in a page itself. Here, it's also doing that, but it's also looking kind of port by port. So one fun one is you can look for particular strings and find 30,000 HP printers that are connected to the internet, not behind firewalls or anything of that nature. I think I have that one here somewhere. I have a lot of these actually open. Yep, serial number. And if one so chooses, and I haven't actually clicked these, but these are almost certainly HP printer landing pages for various printers. Okay, you can only do so much with printers, but a printer, oftentimes, just like our kind of gateway device, if it has a public internet access, an address, it's also going to potentially have an internal one as well, right? I want to be able to print from my local network. I want to be able to print from the internet, which is kind of a dangerous feature, but that feature is enabled on some of these devices by default. This, in fact, could be your entrance point into a particular network of interest. This printer, which was located in Spain, is a little low on color ink, and I don't know if we should tell them or not, or if we should turn it off for them or print a test page to let them know that we're here. I'm not going to do that. The temptation is really high, I have to be honest, but I'm not going to do that because that's setting a very bad example. There's all sorts of really fun things you can do with this for educational purposes only. Before, we had a Google search string to look at terminal services or remote desktops that had a web client, which would be a far subset of them. Here we have basically looking at login.rsp for remote services, and now you can look at all the various various publicly accessible remote desktop clients available in that context. You want to look for 10,000 publicly accessible Minecraft servers. Let's go. Don't know, we care a little bit about the latency associated with these, so maybe we pick some that are kind of geographically located, and you can add geographic information into your search string as well. There's all sorts of websites that are attempting to kind of just provide those kind of links of the things that are basically publicly available, if intended or not. It's sometimes hard to tell. I think it's very likely most of those printers are not intended to be publicly accessible on the internet. there's some limited validity and value and a lot of security vulnerability in doing so. For those web cameras, it's a little bit harder to say. This would be a listing of various Plex servers. So if you don't want to have the Plex server yourself and you want to watch a movie, just click on someone else's Plex server and just run it that way. Probably not legal to do that. There's a few others that are available here, but I think you can kind of get the point of what Shodan sort of provides for you. And there's a long list of basically the equivalent of Google hacks. They're not really Shodan hacks because this is the whole point of that service of doing that for you. If you want to look at like people's Tesla charging, power pack charging status and things like that, you can do so. Now, we talked a little bit about on Tuesday about passive versus active reconnaissance and footprinting. And what I tried to make a distinction between was passive is we're looking at what's already publicly out there. Active is I'm starting to do things like scanning the network myself to determine what is available. It's something of a fuzzy line, but I think once you're typing in commands directly to do a scan of a network, you're now moving into active territory. We'll start there next week. Something like Shodan is kind of a funny in-between though, right? Do we think Shodan and what it's providing, is it passive or is it active? This is more of an academic distinction. It's information that you can use. What do we think? Show of hands, using Shodan, is that passive reconnaissance? What do we think? Few hands. Or do we think it's active? We don't know. It's Thursday. It's all good. That's the remainder of the class. That's fine. It's a funny thing in my opinion. Because what Shodan does, they talk a little bit about their own technology stack and how they do effectively search the entire internet on a periodic basis. They are basically running Nmap on the entire internet, which is something we'll do on our own local networks. They're doing across the entire IPv4 address space. What they're doing is very much active reconnaissance. They then publish that on a publicly accessible web page, so it becomes passive reconnaissance for us. It's a bit of semantics, right? I mean, somebody is doing the active thing, and then we're using their results for our own reconnaissance. So the distinction is a bit gray and fuzzy there. At the end of the day, it's a useful tool. It's a tool that we can use for our purposes. Play around, see what's available. Here's the last one that I have open here. Here is every single IP address available in North Korea. So according to Shodan, North Korea has 50 public IP addresses that are in active use. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Don't want to connect to any of them, but that's what they have currently publicly accessible. This one is a default Nginx website, right? It says welcome to Nginx. So it's not even a configured website. I don't know. I'm curious, but I'm not going to click on any of those right now. Finally, as we kind of wrap up this topic, it's always important as we talk about techniques, what are some of the countermeasures available for those and more of the IT security side of things of protecting against those. A lot of these things are really policy-based of what we're learning about passive reconnaissance. Directory listings to the public are a very limited value and maybe are an artifact of an older time, a more naive kind of time. Disabling those is something you can do as an organizational policy. Or really limit what technical information is revealed through press releases and job openings and quarterly reports and things of that nature. And then this is a much tougher thing to implement, but firm policies on employee social media usage. If you're in the server room, you're not allowed to take a selfie and post it to Instagram. As cool as your server room looks, you probably shouldn't be doing that. There are then technical countermeasures as well. For the most part, at least on publicly accessible resources, they are instructed to adhere to robots.txt limitations to limit what it can be crawled and what can be archived. There's no technical limitation there. It's more of a policy limitation that if you put up that file saying, don't look at /etc this directory, it's not supposed to do so. Then, of course, as with all securing of machines, disabling unneeded services and ports, have a deny first sort of policy. Only when we know for certain we need this particular port open. Only when we know for certain we need our HP LaserJet printer available to this part of the internet do we open it, and we don't leave it open by default. And then finally, as you're working on the security team, as you are a security consultant, you're doing your own pen testing for your own consulting or other practice, routinely doing this. What is true today may be totally different tomorrow in terms of what that sort of public information reveals about your own organization, and sort of raising awareness as well about this, what we publicly post. We know that as sort of an elementary school lesson of what we post on social media, but even things that seem innocuous, like a net ID for our particular user, could in fact lead to a various chain of events that can result in your whole infrastructure going down. Let's leave things here for today. We'll jump into the active side of things on Tuesday.